The Senate will come to order. Prayer will be offered by Dr. Black, the Senate chaplain.
Let us pray. Ever present and ever gracious God, touch the hearts of our lawmakers today with the warmth and wonder of your wisdom and grace. Infuse their lives with an exemplary integrity that illuminates the darkness of cynicism, division, and despair. May our senators see beyond baffling events to the power of your prevailing providence, providing them with a vision of a better nation and world. Lord, use our legislators with such power that they may honor their calling by faithfully serving you and country. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Bridget S. Bate of Arizona to be United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
Yesterday, the Senate voted to advance the nomination of Rachel Beatty of Arizona, the latest of President Trump's qualified judicial nominees. Today, we'll vote on her confirmation as a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Ms. Beatty's nomination comes with the bipartisan support of our colleagues on the Judiciary Committee and a well-qualified rating from the ABA's Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary. Given that 77 senators voted yesterday to advance this nomination, it's obviously clear to the vast majority of us that the President has made yet another excellent choice for the federal bench. I hope each of my colleagues will join me in voting for Ms. Beatty later today. So, Madam President, on another matter entirely, this afternoon, the Senate is going to vote on the far left wish list that many of our Democratic colleagues have rushed to embrace, the so-called Green New Deal. For a relatively sparse resolution, this proposal has already traveled quite a fascinating path in Congress. It originated with the most radical, farthest left members of the new House Democratic majority. The Speaker of the House quickly praised its enthusiasm. Its principal sponsor rolled out the first version of the plan alongside an extensive background document that laid out the policy's true goals in candid detail, but which Democrats then rushed to hastily scrub off the internet. Not exactly an auspicious start, but nevertheless, a number of our Democratic colleagues here in the Senate rushed to embrace it as well. That includes every Democratic senator who is currently running for president has embraced the Green New Deal. Madam President, the energy, the momentum, the defining new voices in today's Democratic Party, they seem to be all in for the Green New Deal. It's ambitious. It captures your imagination, said one current presidential candidate. I'm in all the way, said one of our Senate colleagues who's also running. When asked if the proposal might go too far, another of our Senate colleagues running for president replied on this issue, "You cannot go far enough." So, Madam President, just how far does the proposal go? What exactly is in this thing? What is it? Well, for starters, the proposal addresses the small matter of eliminating, listen to this, eliminating the use of all fossil fuels nationwide over 10 years. Get rid of it all. This might sound like a neat idea in places like San Francisco or New York, the places that the Democratic Party seems totally focused on these days, but the communities, frankly, everywhere else would be absolutely crushed by this. Killing off entire domestic industries, winding down millions of jobs, basically outlawing the only sources of energy that working class and middle class families can actually afford. By one rough estimate, these steps could lead to a spike in household electricity bills of $300 a month, increase in your utility bill. And keep in mind, this is just the warm-up act. While they're at it, our friends on the far left also propose a federally mandated overhaul of every building in America, every building in America. No family home or small business would be safe until it meets Washington bureaucrats' standards of greenness. But if you can believe it, other aspects of this proposal make these things sound downright practical by comparison. The resolution also includes a far broader socialist wish list that gestures towards a new government-run health insurance system, a new system for government-guaranteed housing, and a new government system to guarantee everyone economic security, quote, end quote. The last point's a little vague, but helpfully, before it was frantically scrubbed off the internet, the original sponsor's background document made the long-term goal perfectly clear. economic security to all those who are unable or, listen to this, unwilling to work. That's the background document they rush to delete. The Democrats' long-term vision, taking hardworking people's taxpayer dollars to pay those who choose not to get off their couch day after day simply because they're unwilling to work. So my Democratic colleagues' brilliant new idea, their rallying cry, is snatching away the energy sources that middle-class families use, shuttering the industries that provide many of those families with their livelihoods, changing the homes they live in, the cars they drive, and the health care plans they rely on. Remember what our colleagues said. You cannot go too far. Our colleagues are certainly putting that to the test. Now, I haven't even gotten to what American families would have to pay for the privilege of being lab rats for all this far-left social engineering. We're being lab rats for all of this far-left social engineering. My Democratic colleagues have been fairly quiet on that subject. I guess it's a lot more fun ordering off the menu than taking a look at the check. Families would almost certainly be faced with much higher utility bills. Then the cost to replace appliances, presumably electric cars, would have to be purchased. And then there's the federal tax burden. Just how much of other people's money are Democrats proposing to burn in this effort to turn the country into a far-left science fiction novel? Well, one rough initial estimate found that all the pieces of the Green New Deal might add up to as much as $93 trillion. That's, Madam President, just over the first decade. That's quite a tab. It exceeds the annual GDP of the entire world. The annual GDP of the entire world as of 2017. It would mean historic tax increases, historic new debt, and even that would only begin to scratch the surface. And bear in mind, the sticker price doesn't even begin to capture the full national cost of the economic wound this plan would inflict on our country while all our competitors would be roaring on by. So, my colleagues want to pull the emergency brake on the U.S. economy because it isn't green enough. But global carbon emissions are a global problem. We only produce about 15% of the global total. China already soared past us. They're the world's largest emitter. And in recent years, while U.S. emissions have been actually declining, China's share has been growing fast. We'll certainly get to test out their new economic security payments for those unable or unwilling to work after the Green New Deal drives all of our domestic manufacturing jobs over to China, India, and our other competitors who will gladly gobble up our jobs and continue to emit with reckless ambition. So, my Democratic colleagues have settled on quite an interesting strategy. Maximum pain for American families with no meaningful change in global carbon emissions. Now, since I announced last month that senators would actually have the opportunity to go on record and vote on the socialist wish list, a funny thing has happened. I'm not sure I've ever seen these self-professed supporters of a piece of legislation more angry or irritated that they would actually have to vote on it. They're angry and irritated that they'd actually have to vote on it. Merely bringing their own plan up for a vote, a plan they'd characterized as an amazing step forward, was now declared to be a diversion and a sham. By one colleague's assessment, by getting their proposal a floor vote, I was creating, quote, a ploy to try to undermine the Green New Deal by actually having a vote on it. I have to say, Madam President, it's remarkable enough to see a major political party coalesce around a proposal to forcibly remake the entire country according to what's fashionable in Brooklyn and San Francisco. But it's even more stunning to see my colleagues so angry and upset at the opportunity to back up their new philosophy with their votes. What an outrage to actually vote on something we say we're for. Well, later today, we'll see, the American people will see, they will see which of their senators can do the common sense thing and vote no on this destructive socialist daydream. And they'll see which senators are so fully committed to radical left-wing ideology that they can't even vote no on self-inflicted economic ruin that would take a sledgehammer to America's middle class.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President, are we in a quorum?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, last night, President Trump's Justice Department issued a letter to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals calling for the elimination of health care coverage for tens of millions of Americans. Up until last night, the Trump administration had said one aspect of the Affordable Care Act was unconstitutional, but last night, the Department of Justice declared the entire law and all of its vital health care protections must go. Make no mistake about it. This is an escalation of the Trump administration and Republicans' attacks on protections for people with pre-existing conditions. All the protestations were for keeping pre-existing conditions. President Trump said it as recently as this past campaign, out the window. This court case says get rid of pre-existing conditions, and the Trump administration is pursuing the case. What are they saying to the 52 million Americans who are dependent on protections for pre-existing conditions? What is Donald Trump, President Trump, and his Justice Department saying to a mom whose son or daughter has cancer and the insurance company says we're not covering it? And they have to watch their child suffer because they can't afford it. The move by the Trump administration is a slap in the face to American families, a devastating blow to Republicans who promise to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And how many of our Republican colleagues will go to the floor today and condemn the Trump administration? I'll bet not one. I'll bet not one. I hope I'm wrong, but I'll bet not one. In two short sentences, the Trump administration crystallized its position that the health care coverage enjoyed by nearly 20 million people, as well as the protections by tens of millions more with pre-existing conditions, should be annihilated. That is now the official position, full stop. And it ties a two-year anchor, the Trump position, ties a two-year anchor around the neck of every Republican for the next 2 years. Yet again, they will be forced to defend the indefensible. It's a stark reminder of the difference between our two parties. Democrats are fighting to expand and improve health care coverage and lower costs, while Republicans are trying to take it all away and raise costs. The bottom line, from the moment this administration and this Republican majority came to power, they've waged a wholesale attack on our health care system. They've pushed policies that would rip away people's health care coverage, spike premiums and prescription drug costs, slap older Americans with an age tax, and reverse protections for people with pre-existing conditions like cancer, asthma, and diabetes. Democrats condemn in the strongest possible terms this attack against the American people and demand we take action to protect our health care. I know that the administration is very happy with the Mueller report, so are our Republican friends. This move by the Trump administration to take away health care will prove far more detrimental to the administration and the Republican Party than any gains they might have made by the issuance of Mr. Barr's letter. Mark my words. It's far more important to the American people. Far more important to the American people, because it involves their lives and the lives of their families. And the Trump administration is hurting it badly. Climate change. Now, on another matter, today Leader McConnell will follow through on one of his specialties, gotcha politics, by forcing a vote of the Republicans' version of the Green New Deal. Make no mistake, Republicans want to force this political stunt to distract from the fact that they neither have a plan nor a sense of urgency to deal with the threat of climate change. With this exercise, the Republican majority has made a mockery of the legislative process. It's a political act, a political stunt. Everyone here knows it's a stunt, including the majority leader himself. He puts something on the floor and then votes no. What's the point of that? Other than showing how hypocritical this act is. But with this exercise, they have also elevated the issue in a way I'm sure they never intended. And for that, I want to thank them. because now we're finally talking about climate change. For 5 years, the leader hasn't brought one bill to the floor which will deal with the issue of climate change. He may not agree with what some people are for. What's his plan? What's his plan? Leader McConnell and every Republican, with one exception, has refused to sponsor a resolution. Leader McConnell has refused to answer these questions, which he's been repeatedly asked. 1, is climate change real? Do you believe that, Leader McConnell? Do you believe that, Republican members? 2, climate change is caused by humans. Do you believe that? Say it. Come to the floor and do something about it. And that's 3, Congress must act on climate change. This is a simple resolution. Every Democrat is for it. Will Leader McConnell sign it? Will any other Republican sign it? Nope. Shows where the party is at. And we're going to continue asking that question over and over again, because our Republican colleagues want to play a stunt and vote no on another bill, but they don't want to say what they're for. The scientific consensus is clear. Disasters are getting stronger and stronger. The great irony here is that right after this bill goes down, the McConnell stunt bill goes down, we're going to vote on disaster relief. You know what's made disaster relief so much more necessary, so much more expensive? Climate change. The warmer the air, the warmer the globe, the wilder the weather gets, as the people in Iowa and Nebraska have just experienced. And Kansas. And so, this idea that we're voting for disaster relief after a stunt sham vote on climate change, and the Republican leader and the Republican senators have nothing to say on climate change, reveals in bright lights their ostrich-like behavior, putting their head in the sand, ignoring the reality, doing nothing about it, and playing games. Every single Democrat and a few of our Republican colleagues have joined in the resolution that says these 3 simple things. We will not rest till we have most every Republican joining, because the public is on our side, science is on our side, and the need to help America, farmers, urban dwellers, suburban dwellers, from the devastating changes that climate is bringing upon us is very real. So let's stop the nonsense. Let's get serious. Our children's future depends upon it. Our planet depends upon it. Now, Mr. President, one final matter. Yesterday, I came to the floor and asked unanimous consent on a very simple matter, that the report completed by Special Counsel Mueller and all the corresponding evidence and documentation be publicly made available for the American people. It was a request, above all, to achieve the greatest level of transparency possible into the very serious matters of Russian interference in our elections. Transparency, that's all we want. I'm hardly alone. It's the same resolution that passed the House unanimously, with the president's strongest defenders voting for it. They wanted transparency. So why has Leader McConnell objected to making the report public? What in the world is he hiding? He got up and objected when we asked to make it public. If he had not gotten up, it would have passed. President Trump has called for the report to be made public. So why is the leader, the Republican leader, blocking all attempts at transparency? There's no conceivable reason for the Mueller report to remain hidden from public view. It's a shame, a darn shame, that Leader McConnell thinks otherwise. I yield the floor.
Senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I also want to thank you for your hard work on the sometimes powerful Senate Agriculture Committee. I would like to respond to the leader, but I know he's busy and he's leaving the floor. Just to say it, I think that all Republicans understand there's climate change. All Republicans know that, human activity does contribute to it, and yes, we ought to do something. The point I'm trying to make here is we don't want to do the wrong thing. and cause a great deal of disruption in the process. And I also want to thank Senator Thune for allowing me to speak out of order. I know this is a hardship on his schedule, but he's been very kind to let this happen. I want to thank the sponsors of the Green Deal for enabling all senators the opportunity to discuss the practical challenges this resolution actually presents. For me, as chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, it allows me to discuss the real stewards of our land, our farmers, ranchers, growers, and how this legislation would affect them and their ability not only to feed this country, but a troubled and hungry world as well. Those of us who represent farm country are grateful for the opportunity to underscore something that too many take for granted. Farmers and ranchers and growers in the United States do grow now the safest, most affordable, and abundant food supply in the world. And as I just said, we know that it is a troubled and hungry world that needs farmers, ranchers, and growers and their production to help feed and clothe the world's increasing population. Yes, and I think it will probably go longer than 12 years. As chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, I am proud of our bipartisan record on behalf of American agriculture and, in turn, our record of respecting our nation's natural resources. These things go hand in hand. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle on the agriculture committees and those privileged to work in agriculture, we have always sought to grow and raise more using as few resources as possible. The men and women who make their living off the land have an imperative and keen interest in responsible use and management of our natural resources. Show me a farmer who does not practice conservation or does not have access to precision agriculture or the latest technology, and I will show you a farmer that's really in trouble. In short, within agriculture, there is nothing new with the Green New Deal. It calls for working in a collaborative way with farmers and ranchers and growers in the United States to eliminate pollution and greenhouse gases and emissions from the agriculture sector as much as is technology feasible. But that's the language. By supporting family farming, that's also in the language. Investing in sustainable farming and land practices that increase soil health and building a more sustainable food system that ensures universal access to healthy food. That's in the resolution. The legislation over in the House. Mr. President, Madam President, check, check, and check. We have been doing this already, and we continue to look ahead to create thoughtful, well-considered policies. Now, I do not question the intent of the authors of the Green New Deal, but they don't know what they don't know, especially about agriculture. They need to catch up with the Agriculture Committee and with farm country in general. In fact, we on the Agriculture Committee are so forward-looking that we embraced innovative methods of investing in agriculture research with the creation of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, something new. The foundation leverages public and private dollars to bring together experts to identify and investigate the researchable questions whose answers have the potential to enhance the economic and environmental resilience of our food supply and also the environment. I encourage the senator from Massachusetts and the leader and other co-sponsors to simply ask for a briefing for the folks at FAR. I would say the same to vocal challenges on the House side who helped author, and pardon the acronym, GND, Green New Deal. But given their unfortunate focus on our livestock industry, I simply do not have time, I don't think, to fully discuss emissions emitted from all livestock, or for that matter, for Congress. Maybe that would be a better answer. Perhaps later, after writing point on the herd and getting the cows milked. What is worth our time is the defense of American agriculture, the best in the world, from attack by those who are either uninformed, misinformed regarding organic, processed, and precision agriculture, all modern miracles and all sustainable with regard to our environment. America's farmers, ranchers, and others in rural America are constantly working to produce their crops and to raise their livestock in order to feed a growing world, and to do so with constant challenges presented to them from Mother Nature. The distinguished minority leader just mentioned the floods we're experiencing in Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa. This seems to happen about every 10 years, I'm not sure that it has happened because of global warming, but at least it sure is with regard to climate change. And we're doing everything possible to bring aid and help to those folks who find their farmland underwater. Farmers are natural stewards of the land, and they must be good at problem solving. They identify the issues of the trend, find ways to adjust their business and respond to that issue and improve their way of operating. They'd like to do that under a Green New Deal. If they don't just adjust to address those challenges and simply do the right thing, their farm or ranch and their livelihood will not be sustainable. It's pretty simple. Every living, breathing person on this earth needs food in order to survive. Obviously, we cannot and do not produce food in the same manner that our grandparents did, because those methods were not sustainable and today would not produce food at the scope and scale our troubled and hungry world demands. American farmers and ranchers who live by the concept of continuous improvement, sound science, and voluntary-based conservation are a model for other industries and other countries on how to address problems like climate change in a very practical way. America's farmers and ranchers raise the same amount of beef as they did in the 1970s, but they do so with 33% fewer cattle. Over the last 50 years, American farmers have reduced water use in pork production by 41%, and the list goes on. These are real success stories that speak to how farmers are already managing natural resources responsibly and voluntarily making contributions to address the issue of climate change. Examples like this abound. They abound in agriculture. The American farmer, through a continuous improvement, embracing sound science, implementing new technologies such as biotechnology, no-till farming, and being conservation-minded, has achieved unprecedented success that I do not believe the proponents of G&D, i.e. the Green New Deal, realize. In the recent Farm Bill that passed Congress with overwhelming margins, we strengthened the voluntary conservation programs. We increased investments in agriculture research, supported risk management tools that will benefit producers of all crops in all regions, and provided additional authorities to address animal health concerns. This legislative package bolsters the sustainability of U.S. farmers, ranchers, and others in rural America while being environmentally sound. Unfortunately, vague proposals or resolutions, such as the Green New Deal, that contain no real details, no metrics, are not going to solve the issue of climate change in any meaningful way. And regulating American farmers and ranchers out of business will only result in food and fiber production being outsourced to countries that do not have the same conservation-minded producers that we have here in the U.S. And let's face it, nobody, no one that I know likes being told what to do, what to drive, or what to eat. Consumers value free choice. They also expect access to reasonably priced food and nutritious food. In fact, consumers will assuredly continue to demand the choice of animal protein here in the United States, and so any reasonable discussion on the agriculture sector's contributions to solutions on climate change must begin with this acknowledgement. These policy decisions must recognize the complexity of agriculture and food value chain, the growers, the input suppliers, the processors, and the list goes on, handlers and consumers, and they must be based in reality to facilitate a genuine conversation between rural and urban constituencies. I know, I understand, I realize, I get it. There are those who think the Green New Deal is a moral imperative, and it may well be. But farmers continuing to feed the world is also a moral imperative. Too many go hungry each day in America. Ending this is also a moral imperative. And too many go hungry in a troubled and hungry world as well. In restricting American agriculture in any way, whether it's in resolution form or legislative form, the Green New Deal does not match up with these moral responsibilities. I want to thank the distinguished senator from South Dakota allowing me to step in front of him. That doesn't happen very often. So, Coop, you're up.
Thank you, Madam President.
Majority Whip.
Thank you, Madam President. And I want to thank my colleague from Kansas, the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, who was incredibly instrumental in getting that last farm bill passed. And I have the privilege of serving on his committee, and we do a lot of important work for our farmers and ranchers in this country. And as he very aptly pointed out, one of the things that could undo a lot of the good work and things that we hope are going to improve the economic outlook for farmers and ranchers, which today is a very difficult one. Something could really undo that is passage of something like this Green New Deal. It could do irreparable harm to the ag economy in this country. It would be disastrous for farmers and ranchers. And Madam President, this afternoon, the Senate Democrats are going to have a chance to vote on the Green New Deal. And the American people will have a chance to see just how many Democrats embrace this massive government expansion. The Green New Deal, as the name suggests, is largely about energy policy. But there's a lot more to unpack. The Green New Deal is a comprehensive socialist fantasy that would put the government in charge of everything from your health care to the way that you heat your house. Do you like your car? Under the Green New Deal, you almost certainly won't be able to keep it. The Green New Deal's authors want to eliminate fossil fuels, which means that the engine that currently powers your car will likely be illegal. It would also mean roughly 3.5 million American truck drivers will be out of a job. Presumably, airplanes would also be grounded, drying up the aviation sector and the travel, tourism, and business it supports. Do you like your house? Well, that may not matter if Washington planners decide that your house doesn't meet the Green New Deal's guidelines. Enjoy rebuilding your home according to plans provided by Washington. Do you like your job? The Green New Deal will eliminate millions of current energy jobs. But that's not all. The energy sector, the energy industry in this country powers the American economy. Our supply of reliable, affordable energy allows businesses to flourish. So what happens when the Green New Deal drives up the price of energy? Or when businesses are hit with Green New Deal taxes? Or when American manufacturers can't meet the Green New Deal's stringent emissions goal? Well, I will tell you what will happen, Madam President. American jobs will be lost or move overseas. Madam President, I mentioned Green New Deal taxes. That's because paying for this plan would require massive tax hikes on just about everybody. Now, one think tank has released a first estimate of what the Green New Deal would cost, and the answer is between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. Between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. That's almost an incomprehensible amount of money. $93 trillion is more than the amount of money that the United States government has spent in its entire history. That's right, Madam President. Since 1789, when the Constitution went into effect, the federal government has spent a total of $83.2 trillion. In other words, it's taken us 230 years to spend the amount of money that Democrats want to spend in 10. So how do Democrats plan to pay for this? Well, they don't actually have a plan. The Green New Deal resolution itself refers vaguely to community grants, public banks, and other public financing, end quote. Well, that's all very well, but unless Democrats' plan is to just print a lot of money, that public financing has to come from somewhere. And since the government is not currently sitting on a spare $9.3 trillion a year, that money is likely going to come from taxes. New and heavy taxes on just about every American. Let me be very clear. This is not a plan that can be paid for with Democrats' favorite solution of taxing the rich. Taxing every millionaire in the United States at a 100% rate for 10 years would only bring in a tiny fraction of $93 trillion. In fact, there aren't enough millionaires in the entire world to cover $93 trillion. In 2017, the combined wealth of all the millionaires in the world was $70.2 trillion. So you could literally confiscate all the money from all the millionaires in the entire world, and you still wouldn't have $93 trillion. The Green New Deal is not a plan that can be paid for by taxing the rich. This massive government expansion would be paid for on the backs of working families. Madam President, the energy industry has been a bright spot for American families over the past few years. Between 2007 and 2017, as the price of health care soared and education and food costs increased, household energy costs decreased. That's a big deal for working families. But that progress would go away under the Green New Deal. Energy costs would go up, not down, and the price of a lot of other items would likely rise sharply as well, as everyone from farmers to manufacturers struggled under the Green New Deal's mandates and taxes. And needless to say, families' paychecks would shrink by a lot. The size of the tax hikes that would be required to even begin to finance the Green New Deal would usher in a new era of diminished prosperity for American families. Gone would be the American dream of giving your children a better life than you've enjoyed. Under the Green New Deal, American families could look forward to permanently narrowed horizons. So this afternoon, Madam President, my Democrat colleagues face a choice. They can double down on their socialist fantasies and vote for the Green New Deal resolution, perhaps the most irresponsible and costly resolution ever to come before the Senate, or they can reject this green nightmare and resolve to work with Republicans to advance clean energy in a way that won't devastate the livelihoods of the American people. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to speak today about the urgent need for the United States to take action to confront climate change. I think it's pretty clear from the evidence, from the science right now, that the following is true. Climate change is real. It is a threat to human life. Second, that climate change is caused by human activity. And third, we must take action against it by reducing substantially greenhouse gas emissions. We have an obligation, all of us, in both houses of Congress, in both parties, and in both branches of government, the legislative and executive branches. We all have an obligation to care for and protect God's creation. We don't have time. We don't have time for cynical political games. We need to be serious about this challenge. According to the World Food Program, over 120 million people face, quote, crisis-level food insecurity, unquote, worldwide. That's the World Food Program. And too often, we don't focus on that challenge. Developing countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America have been hardest hit by frequent and intense floods, droughts, and storms. These climate events can quickly spiral into full-blown food and nutrition crises. The U.S. intelligence community, the intelligence agencies of the United States of America, have linked global food insecurity to instability that can lead to a rise in violent extremism and international crime that puts the United States at risk. The January 2014 Worldwide Threat Assessment of the United States intelligence community reported that the, quote, lack of adequate food will be a destabilizing factor in countries important to United States national security, unquote. We know that the following is true. Climate change leads to humanitarian crises. Humanitarian crises lead to hunger, death, and insecurity. Hunger, death, and insecurity leads to desperation, instability, extremism, and terrorism. Inaction on this issue, predicated on denial or indifference, will result in millions around the world suffering extreme hunger resulting from climate-related disasters, which in turn leads to a rise in extremism and terrorism. Ignoring climate change undermines United States national security. Similarly, failure to address climate change will have negative consequences here at home. Just one example among many. A 2015 paper entitled, quote, "Growing Stronger Toward a Climate-Ready Philadelphia," unquote, reports that since 2010, Philadelphia has experienced the following. Again, this is a 2015 report talking about just 5 years. 5 years. Here's what Philadelphia experienced. The snowiest winter on record, the 2 warmest summers on record, the wettest day on record, the 2 wettest years on record, and 2 hurricanes. That's just in 5 years in one city, in one state. This same paper projects, quote, Philadelphia may experience 4 to 10 times as many days per year above 95 degrees and as many as 16 days a year above 100 degrees by the end of the century, up from the 1950 to 1999 average of fewer than 1. Fewer than 1. Of all these changes have negative consequences for local economies and for the well-being of all of our constituents. Increased heavy rainfall can lead to more flooding in communities along, just for example, the Delaware River and the Schuylkill River in my home state, which places additional stress on our already outdated wastewater infrastructure. Older Americans and lower-income American families are particularly hard hit by heat waves. We know that nearly a quarter of children in Philadelphia suffer from asthma, a condition that is exacerbated by ground-level ozone, which is made worse by hot weather. So, Mr. President, as Americans, we have a duty to develop a strategy and to take action to confront climate change. We must also provide robust assistance, training, and support for workers who may be adversely impacted by the steps that we take. But we don't have time to waste. We need a serious, bipartisan effort to develop a strategy to take action, to prevent the horror that results from inaction on climate change. Everyone knows that today's vote will do nothing to help us deal with this grave crisis. Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
I recognize the Assistant Democratic Leader.
Ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You either believe it or you don't believe it. Is there such a thing as climate change? Are we going through some change on our planet today? I think so. 98% of scientists who report on the subject believe the same thing. And the evidence is everywhere, isn't it? The extreme weather events which we're seeing are, I think, indication something is happening on this earth that we call home. The obvious question is, do we have anything to do with it? The fact that we are alive, functioning, building things, dealing with travel by plane and other means, does that have anything to do with what's happening to our planet? I think so. Can we do something about it? Sure. We know we can. If we're dealing with greenhouse gas emissions that somehow in the atmosphere are raising the temperature of planet Earth, what can we do about those greenhouse gases? We know there are a lot of very simple and obvious things. I can remember a debate on this floor when we talked about making cars and trucks more fuel efficient, and the folks in Detroit, the smartest people running the automobile companies, said, impossible. You can't do it. Americans will never buy those cars. It just won't work. Thank goodness we ignored them. We established standards and regulations. And you know what? Today, like it or not, we drive more fuel-efficient cars or trucks. Frankly, I like it. It was a step in the right direction, which took governmental, congressional prodding to take place and made this a cleaner, safer place to live in the United States. And there are other things we can do as well, but first we need a basic agreement that there is a problem, that human conduct, the way we live and the way we work and the way we produce things, has something to do with it, and that we are committed to changing it. How many nations in the world have agreed with that conclusion? All of them. Wait, all of them except one. This country. This president, who decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. That is a universal global decision by every nation on earth, except the United States, that we do have a climate problem, and that we're the cause of some part of it at least, and we should do something to change it. This president says, I don't buy it. I don't think the science proves it. He and he alone, on behalf of this country, stepped away from this agreement. I think that's a serious mistake. I'm happy to report that governors across the United States, at least Democratic governors, have said they're going to ignore the president when it comes to this, and they're going to set out with their own policies. I salute my own governor, J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. He's not part of this denial camp that is trying to ignore the problem. He's trying to do in our state, as others are, something to make sure that this planet is more livable, more habitable. Isn't it amazing this has become such a partisan issue? There was a time on the floor of the Senate when it was not. I remember when the late Senator John McCain, whom I still honor to this day, not only for his service in the Senate, but his service to this country. I remember when the late Senator John McCain teamed up with Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman, and they started proposing ideas to deal with climate change. Bipartisan proposals, bipartisan votes. Not anymore. Nope. We've got a big block, big wall down the middle of this chamber, and on that side, climate denial. On this side, a belief that we should be doing something about it. We could do something today, couldn't we? Couldn't we take the latest climate assessment from the federal government that spells out the problem, spells out the challenge? Couldn't we come up with at least a reasonable bipartisan approach to dealing with the clear scientific evidence produced by this government as required by law? Of course we could, but we're not going to. Instead, the Republican Senate leader has decided he wants to make a political move. He wants to put the Democrats on the spot, not to solve the problem, but to have something he can talk about in the next campaign. So a group came together, and they have proposed a Green New Deal, they call it. I've taken a look at it. I went to Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who is one of the sponsors. I asked him about it because he's one of the authors. I know Ed Markey. I served with him in the House. I've served with him in the Senate. He has established credentials when it comes to this issue. He truly cares, and he's done many, many things to show that caring. And I asked him, what is this Green New Deal? It's not a law. I mean, it's not a bill that would become a law. It's simply a resolution, which is kind of a statement of purpose, a statement of position. And he said to me that it was aspirational. In other words, the Green New Deal sets out aspirations and targets and values. I said to him, Ed, that's a good idea, but I want something that's not aspirational. I want something that's legislational. That's what we do here, right? And I'm sure he'll come up with those specifics. Well, Senator McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, has decided we're going to put the Democrats on the spot. Take it or leave it in its entirety, the Green New Deal. Be on the record and vote this afternoon. Well, I'll make it clear to you right now that I think there are parts of that Green New Deal that are excellent and some that I disagree with. At this point in time, I'm going to be voting present this afternoon because I believe we should be legislational. I believe we should be bipartisan. I've said this on the floor many times, and I'll say it again. The only major political party in the world today that denies climate change is the Republican Party of the United States of America. Now, I've waited for some Republican to come to the floor and say, oh, no, that's not true, Senator Durbin. There are other major political parties that have the same position we do, and no one has come to the floor. One Republican senator a few months back, quietly in an elevator, said, I think there's a party in Australia that denies climate change. Maybe that's true. But why in the world have we reached a point that this is such a partisan issue? Don't we all see what's happening with the weather? Can't we see what's happening in terms of the temperature of this earth that we live on has consistently, year after year, continued to rise? Don't we realize that has an impact on this earth that we live on? Don't we realize that if it continues unabated, the earth that I'm leaving to my children and grandchildren will be a much different place, a much more challenging place? Can't we see the flooding in the streets down in Miami and Florida? Can't we see the melting of the glaciers? Isn't that proof positive that something is happening? In my part of the world, the Midwest, I grew up with tornadoes. We even named sports teams after the tornadoes. They're so common where I live. And I used to remember as a kid, it happened a half dozen times, but you'll never forget it. In the middle of the night, Mom and Dad wake you up and say, the tornado siren's blaring, get in the basement right now. Grab your covers and pillow and get downstairs. We'd head down to the basement and wait until the all-clear signal. Tornadoes were part of our lives, but they were usually confined to the spring and summer months. Just this last December, we had a tornado in Taylorville, Illinois, 30 miles away from where I live. It wasn't supposed to come this time of year. Unusual things are happening just like that all over the place, and they're devastating. Don't take my word for it. Talk to the people in the insurance industry, property and casualty insurance. They make a living trying to guess what the weather's going to be. If they see some horrible weather condition coming, they know it's not good for their bottom line. I've talked to them. There are some states that they're unwilling to write property and casualty insurance in because of the vulnerability to hurricanes, tornadoes, extreme weather events. They're making a conscious profit and loss business decision based on the evidence before them that something is happening to weather in the United States. They're not in denial. They embrace the concept every day when they decide whether to write insurance and the premiums to charge. So if the people who do this for a living, who have to show a profit in their company, have come to the conclusion that climate change is for real, why haven't we in the United States Senate? Why instead do we engage in this political theater that we're going to have this afternoon? Why instead aren't we on a bipartisan basis sitting down and saying, well, what can we do? What can we do in terms of conserving energy, in terms of being more fuel efficient, in terms of being more sensitive to this environment? What can we do? There are a handful of Republican senators who have stepped up and said we should. We can see climate change where we live, but I wish they would become a force to lead their leadership forward into taking this up on a serious basis. This afternoon's vote is just part of a political stunt. It is not a serious effort to deal with climate change. We better do that pretty soon. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
I recognize the Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, thank you. I'm sorry that I didn't catch all of the remarks from my friend from Illinois, because he's pointed out at the end that there are some on my side of the aisle that acknowledge that we are dealing with a changing climate and that those impacts are real. Well, this senator is one of those. I come from a state where we see it. It is real. It is tangible. It has impact to not only the land, the water, but to the people. And we see that in the Arctic. So I am one who is approaching this from the perspective of pragmatism, from the approach of practical solutions that we can move forward with. And while I like aspirations and we all have to have goals, I want us to make sure that we are not setting ourselves up to a situation where the expectation is not realistic. And you mentioned the vote that we will have later this afternoon. I've suggested that it is important for us around here to make sure that we don't distract from those pragmatic, practical solutions, that we don't amp the rhetoric up so high that we can't get ourselves to a place where we can work cooperatively, collaboratively to get to these solutions. Because if we're going to address in a meaningful way, it must be bipartisan, it must be enduring, it must move from one administration to another, and it has to be something, again, that we can work to with meaningful steps. So I'd like to take just a couple minutes today to speak to some of the things and some of the areas where I think Congress can actually make some progress as we look to the issue of climate change. And I have refrained from speaking specifically to the Green New Deal as it has been laid down and introduced, because I don't see it as a real and a viable solution that has been fully considered as a proposal. It has certainly got a lot of aspiration to it, certainly has a lot of aspiration. But I've kind of refrained from piling on, if you will, about the costs of the deal. Because I think we can get back and forth in that in terms of how much does it really cost to the individual American, what does it cost to society, what is the cost of not doing something. But I think that those are all kind of almost false in the sense, because it's not that we are not doing anything, all right? I think we need to establish that. And then if you were to enact and move forward with every aspect of the proposal as it has been laid out, again, is it possible? Is it possible? It is certainly a worthy goal for us in this country to be transitioning to more renewable, cleaner sources of energy. We're doing that. We're certainly seeing that as the cost of solar is coming down, as we're seeing more wind that's being harnessed. I think we have great potential in more hydro, in more geothermal, the technologies that could be coming our way when it comes to ocean energy. So surely we need to be moving in this direction, but is it affordable? Is it possible to transition to 100% renewable energy and electric vehicles over the next 10 years? I don't believe it is physically possible for us to do it in 10 years. So are we setting something up so that young people like you that are listening to me say, well, sure, you should be able to do that in 10 years. You say you can. So if you haven't done it, you failed. This is not a question of have we succeeded or have we failed, but is every step that we're taking moving us in a more positive direction? Shouldn't it be a worthy goal to maximize our energy efficiencies within our buildings, within how we access our power? Absolutely. But is it possible, or would we be able to physically retrofit every building in America to maximize energy and water efficiency over the next 10 years? I don't believe that we can do that in 10 years. So aspirations are good, goals are good, But again, when you look at what has been specifically laid down in this Green New Deal, it's more than just transitioning to renewables or electric vehicles or greater energy efficiency. It calls for a federal jobs guarantee. It focuses on healthcare, education, wages, trade, a lot more. And it suggests unprecedented levels of prosperity and economic security for all the people of the United States. Wonderful, I'd love that. But how do we get there? What is the feasible mechanism of accomplishing this goal? So let's be honest with where we are and recognize that the potential costs of, quote, this Green New Deal, whether you want to peg it in the price range of $50 trillion to $90 trillion over the next 10 years, I'm not going to get caught up in those numbers because that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. What I really hope doesn't happen is that this discussion, again, about whether it's the Green New Deal or whatever you want to tag it, that we are not distracted from the necessary and important conversation that we must have about climate change and the practical steps that we can take to address it. So let's talk about that. I mentioned to my friend from Illinois, we see it in Alaska. We say that we're ground zero for climate change. The Arctic is warming 2 to 3 times the rate of the rest of the world. We're seeing glaciers retreat, permafrost is thawing, we're seeing sea levels rise, wildlife migration patterns are changing, we're seeing different invasive species, we're seeing with the water temperature, we're seeing ocean acidification, villages are being threatened by coastal erosion and in need of relocation. So for us, this is real. This is real. Climate change is, and if you don't want to use the word climate change, you don't have to use the word climate change, but just come up and take a look, because something is happening. We're seeing it. And so engaging in rhetoric that is either fantasy or denial really doesn't help those who are facing this. But I think that there are some policies that both parties can support that I think can make a real difference in real time. And so I want to first start off by acknowledging that, look, we're not in a situation and a place where we're doing nothing. That's not the case. We are working on policies, and we have put policies in place over the course of years that are making a difference and will make a difference moving forward. So it's not like we're starting from scratch here. Just look at where we were last year. We expanded the tax credit for carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, CCUS. We increased funding for DOE, Department of Energy, to research and develop cleaner technologies. We passed legislation to promote basic science, nuclear energy, hydropower, and more. Many of us support the production, the use, and export of clean-burning natural gas, which can substantially help to reduce global emissions. So that was just last year in terms of those policies that we put in place that are moving us forward in the right direction. You don't always hear about it, but we have a pretty decent story to tell here in this country. We're leading the world in greenhouse gas reductions. Despite an uptick that we saw last year in 2018, our emissions have fallen significantly over the past decade. So we've made progress, but again, we need to be making more progress, and in my view, more accelerated progress. And so what more can we do? That's a conversation that we're having in the Energy Committee. I've been working with my ranking member, Senator Manchin from West Virginia. It's a conversation that we've been having on both sides of the committee. We had a hearing on the impact on the electric sector due to climate change. We had that hearing about 10 days or so ago now. We're planning on having others. We're talking with other colleagues that are not part of our committee about what more can be done. 2 weeks ago, I was in Houston attending the big oil and gas conference, the big global conference that is, it's kind of like the Davos of oil and gas. And it was notable that throughout that week conference, with oil and gas producers predominantly, the focus and the attention to climate change and what we are doing with those technologies that will help us to reduce methane leakage, what we're doing to help share some of these environmental technologies, what more we're doing to help facilitate these clean, lower carbon technologies. This is coming from an industry that is recognizing that the innovation must happen. It was fascinating, Mr. President. I sat down with a group of about 20 pretty high up folks within their sectors. And I'm thinking we're going to be talking about what some of the latest technologies are in oil and gas development. But about 2/3 of the people around the table were not from oil and gas companies. They were from high-tech companies. They're there because they see that the real difference in making a difference is going to come from these technologies, and they want to be a part of that conversation. So that's a good conversation to be having. What we're doing within the Energy Committee, we're gonna refresh the bipartisan energy bill that we moved out of the committee and off this floor a couple of years ago with the help of Senator Cantwell. We moved it out with support of 85 members. It may be that we've got to move some smaller bills instead of everything all at once, but we've got to be updating our policies. We haven't updated an energy policy for 11 years now. When you think about, Senator Cantwell knows, when you think about where the industry has gone, where the energy sector has gone, and the fact that our policies have lagged, that's a drag. We need to address that. So I think that there are areas where we can reach this bipartisan agreement on policies that support the innovation, that break down the barriers, that promote efficiency, and keep the markets well supplied. There's a lot more that we can be doing on nuclear energy. I'm going to be introducing a bipartisan bill this week to promote advanced reactors. There's more we can be doing on carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. This is a big priority of Senator Manchin's. We know that unlocking the key is going to be with storage and energy storage. We've got to be advancing that. There's so much more room within hydropower, microgrids to lower costs for energy in rural America, to lower the cost of all renewables and make them more competitive, to ensure that we're producing the minerals and the materials needed for the technologies. I mentioned sharing environmental technologies. So it's not just the Energy Committee that's going to be working on this. All the committees will have their own contribution to make, and I welcome that. But we've got to have rational discussion. I've said, come to the Energy Committee where there's a safe space if you want to talk about climate. You're a Republican on this side that has said, oh, no, I don't know that I want to go there, a Democrat on that side. Let's sit down and have rational conversation about how we're going to be working together across the aisles to agree on policies that will deliver cleaner and lower carbon technologies. These have to be pragmatic, they have to be durable, and they have to be bipartisan. Senator Manchin and I penned an op-ed that ran in the Washington Post a few weeks ago, and we talked about, it wasn't great earth-shaking, brand new novel ideas on how to address climate change, but what we said is, we got to join hands on this. We have got to come together, and we're both from producing states with very vulnerable populations. So take a look at the two of us and work with us to help advance some of these things. We got more shout out, not for highlighting some new technology, but the fact that we were talking together as Republicans and Democrats. That is going to be an important part of how we move forward. I mentioned I'm from a producing state. You all know that. But what many don't know is how Alaska is leading the way in what is possible for some of the innovation, the proving ground for technologies. We've got about every resource that you can think of in great abundance, including sunshine. You don't think about solar for us, but we're putting them to good use. We have been pioneering when it comes to microgrids and these smaller scale technologies. But we've got wind turbines out in St. Michael's. We've got energy efficient refrigeration on St. Paul Island. This is a little tiny island out in the middle of the ocean there. We've got clean power generation in Kodiak. About 99% of that significant fishing community is renewable. We've got an in-river system being installed in Igiagik. We've got innovation happening all over the place, and it's happening because we're driven by necessity. It costs too much. It's not sustainable. I don't want to be from a state where most of my off-road communities are powered by diesel. It's not good for them. It's not good for anybody. So how do we get off that? Well, allow us to move forward and free up. And some are going to be critical of me. They're going to say, you know what, Lisa, you're talking baby steps. You're talking wind turbines in St. Michael's. You're talking about energy efficiency in St. Paul. Well, you know what? When you're paying $7, $8, $9 a gallon to keep the lights on, to keep something refrigerated, you just can't. Your kilowatt hour, close to 80 cents a kilowatt hour, that's not sustainable. That's not sustainable. So for these communities, it is making a difference. And you're saying, well, we got a big globe out there. Well, we do have a big globe out there, and we all have a responsibility there. But we have to start. And I want to share a quote from my friend, the former Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz. And he said this at CERAWeek. He says, he was talking about some of the practical, pragmatic solutions. And he said that some are going to argue that it's not enough. And he says, some would argue that, well, that won't get us there as fast as we need to go. I would argue that would get us there as fast as we can go. So we must move. We recognize that. But we have to know that the only way we're going to be moving is if we move together. That's what we've got to do here in Congress. We've got to take these policies that can keep us moving to lower emissions, to address the reality of climate change, to do so all the while that we are recognizing that we've got an economy that we need to keep strong, that we have vulnerable people that we need to protect, that we have an environment that we all care about, Republicans and Democrats. And it's not just the environment in our states or our country, but it's our global environment. And so how we're working forward together with that is a priority, or should be a priority for us all. So my hope is we get beyond the rhetoric, the high-fired rhetoric, and we get to practical, pragmatic, bipartisan solutions. With that, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Chair, could I ask
yes.
the senator from Alaska to yield for just 10 seconds?
I will.
I thank you. And you were the person I was thinking of when I stood here and said there are exceptions when it comes to this partisan divide between us. And your presentation I stayed for because I knew what it was going to be, and I wanted it to be part of the record that I think you and Senator Cantwell, whom we recognize on our side of the aisle as one of the real leaders on this subject, can show us the way in the Senate to find a bipartisan approach to deal with this challenge. Thank you.
Well, I thank my colleague for that, and I want to acknowledge the support and the partnership that I have had with Senator Cantwell. She and I come from differing views on certain issues, but throughout our time as the chair and the ranking on the committee, we really did work to try to advance some of these solutions where I think we would both agree there is common ground. And again, advancing that is important. It is important for the progress that we are making, that is making a difference, that is helping to reduce the emissions, that is helping to move us towards greater efficiency. And so let's not poo-poo the small things. Let's acknowledge that together building things, you do elevate yourself. But we've got to start. And if we keep dividing ourselves, then we're not going to be able to come together to build these bridges. So I thank my friend from Washington State who has worked hard on the committee to advance this and continues to do so. With that, I yield the floor,
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Washington State.
Mr. President, I come to the floor to join this debate, and I thank my colleagues, the senator from Illinois and certainly the senator from Alaska, for her comments, because I think some of what I'm going to say will probably overlap in the context of working together to get things done now. Why do I say that's so important? Because she and I worked on a bipartisan energy package that we passed out of the United States Senate over 2 years ago that had very important what I would call implementation strategies for allowing our businesses and our communities to be more cost competitive when it comes to energy. Certainly in the state of Alaska, I can't imagine paying $9 a gallon for fuel just to heat a home or to have your hospital or your school available for kids to go to play in after school or just meet the healthcare needs of a community. So getting energy right, not just in big urban cities like Seattle, which is a lot easier to do. We have net zero buildings, probably some of the best net zero buildings in the country, already establishing how you can create energy and sell it back to the grid and be more energy efficient. But we have to have solutions that are going to meet the needs all across the United States of America. So good news to hear that the chairwoman of the Energy Committee is planning another energy bill, and hopefully some of those provisions that we worked on 2 years ago, like smart building strategy to help our re-engineering of energy systems within our buildings to make them more energy efficient, would also go a long way. That's about 40% of America's energy use. And every dollar that we help a business save in energy costs just gets plugged back into that business's competitiveness in working in today's economy. So I thank her for that, and I look forward to seeing what she and the ranking member, Senator Manchin, push forward, and certainly I know we will have our ideas. But we're here, part of this debate about the energy policy and getting it right for our future prosperity and our competitiveness. And I also agree with my colleague that getting things done is important, because I think what we have proven over the last decade, maybe 15 years, is that we can transition to cleaner fuels, we can become more energy independent, we can become more energy efficient, and doing so actually creates new jobs that are higher wage jobs and help us with the future. What Americans want to know is whether we can make it through this transition without doing great damage to our economy. And I think the results of us working together to pass these legislative ideas in the last decade have proven to be very strong incentives. First of all, let's talk about incentives writ large, tax incentives, because we've been involved with the Finance Committee over the last several years to put in place tax credits that rebalanced our incentives as a nation more on the side of renewable energy and away from fossil fuels. This was done in 2008. My colleague, then Senator Ensign of Nevada, we were able to work to make sure that we were driving down the costs of solar and wind and biofuels. This legislation, which was extended in the Recovery Act, now helps us with wind supplies of over 6% of the U.S. supply. So I know that my colleagues in Iowa know how important this is, because their state's electricity generates millions of dollars in economic activity. So the fact that we focused on renewables in our tax incentive policy has helped that industry grow and become a very big part of our system. Today's grid economy also is being modernized, and we've worked to put R&D on the table and to allow communities throughout the United States to invest in smart grid technology. The presiding officer comes from a state where there are probably leaders in a lot of renewable energy. I know there's wind projects in the state of Washington from companies in his state that are showing just how efficient wind has become over a long period of time. Now, who would have originally thought, if I was talking about the presiding officer state, Florida, that we would be talking about wind? You would think I'd be talking about solar. But this is just to show you that the era of distributed generation, that energy can be created from lots of different sources, put on the grid, moved around cost effectively in smart ways to become more efficient, would help us move forward the future of giving people better opportunities than the pollution that we see from carbon-intensive areas of the United States. So even in areas around the United States that still do remain on coal, now people are starting to see that these renewables are cheaper. The Northern Indiana Public Service Company found that building renewables is cheaper than existing coal plants, keeping them open. According to the company's 2018 Integrated Resource Plan filed in October, they can save their customers $4 billion over the next 30 years. So ramping down the amount of coal they use from 2/3 of their generation mix today to 15% by 2023 and eliminating the use of coal entirely by 2028. So these aren't just places like my state in Washington, where we have, as I said, a lot of technology and a lot of efficiency, but also states that are making the transition off of these fossil fuels, showing that it's cheaper for their consumers and that that is a good investment. And we know that new wind power purchase agreements continue to set records for the lowest cost power, putting downward pressure on electricity costs nationwide. I can't tell you how important that is. That, as a state where we've had cheap hydro for decades, decades, and decades, it has built our economy over and over again. I like to say it helped us store apples. After you pick apples and you want to store them for a while, guess what helps? Cheap electricity. But now we store bits, actual software bits, data centers who want cheap electricity. So the very, very nature of cheap electricity keeps driving Washington's economy over and over. So I know that other states in the nation would benefit from cheaper electricity sources. It would help their businesses and it would help their consumers. So today, despite the fact that over 90% of all electricity generating capacity over the past century has been in the renewable area or natural gas, consumers are paying 4% less per kilowatt hour for electricity than they did a decade ago. So this diversification off of fossil fuel, this investment in these cleaner sources of energy are helping consumers lower rates, and that is why we need to keep going. There is a reason Fortune 500 companies are among the largest renewable energy investors in the country. According to the Wall Street Journal, corporations as diverse as Budweiser, The Gap, MGM International have invested over $16 billion in wind and solar in 2018, and this is expected to grow in 2019. Even the utility industry is waking up to this new reality. The CEO of NextEra, the largest U.S. electricity company in the world, by market capitalization, recently told investors that solar and wind plus storage will be cheaper than coal and oil or nuclear. So this is something that we need to realize, that specifically he said that the subsidy for wind generation costs will be 2 to 2.5% per kilowatt, and large scale will only be a little higher than that. So adding storage to this will help us get those prices down even more. That is why getting the R&D budget right for the Department of Energy right now and ARPA-E is so critical. We can't cut these programs. We need to make sure that we're continuing to make an investment so that our nation's electricity sector provides not only more affordable, not only more reliable, but also cleaner energy that will help us with our atmosphere. We already now have 3.2 million people working in the clean energy sector. That's nearly 3 times as many jobs as in the fossil fuel industry. And yet people continue to act like this is an economic debate only about one sector over the other. It is about how we make the transition, how we skill and train people for these future opportunities that support millions of jobs here in the United States of America. Now, why do I want to continue to go that route? Because I want the United States to be a leader in clean energy technology. I don't want to leave this up to our competitors and other countries for them to reap the benefit of better technology and higher wage jobs. I want us to reap these benefits. And so I have seen many companies who have made their transition in the energy sector from a fossil fuel focus to now renewables, and I hope that will continue to happen. Another area that we've incented over the last 10 years that is, I think, proven to be a good investment. Senator Hatch and I teamed up in 2007 to introduce legislation providing a $7,500 tax credit for plug-in electric vehicles. Now, I know at the time people thought, well, what is this electric vehicle market all about? But I think we can look here in 2019 and we see exactly what it is about, that consumers have more choices, there are more competitors in the market, and we are reducing our dependence on fossil fuel. So that is why we need to fight President Trump's budget request to take away those tax incentives on people who buy electric vehicles, because we need to still continue to move forward on driving down the costs. Another area that we made progress on in the last decade was fuel efficiency for automobiles. I can tell you what that fight was like in 2007 as we struggled here to move forward. But fuel efficiency economy increases will result in oil savings in 2030 of about 3 million barrels per day, more than we get imported from the Persian Gulf or Venezuela combined. So we do not need to roll back fuel efficiency standards for automobiles. I believe this is a red herring. We know that fuel efficiency helps consumers drive to work every day and afford to fill up in a more economic way. If the Trump administration does roll back these fuel efficiency gains, owners of an average model vehicle will have to fill up their gas tank 66 times more and cost drivers over $1,620 more than they currently pay. So why roll them back? Another great area of success has been on establishing a renewable fuel standard back in 2007 in that same bipartisan energy package that was worked on by so many members of this institution and successfully by so many members in this institution. So to me, it stands in stark contrast to where we are today in this debate, because all of the people working together, our colleague, the late Senator Ted Stevens, and the late Senator Danny Inouye played key roles as chairman and ranking member of the Commerce Committee, the EPW Committee, the Energy Committee, all added to that legislation in 2007. But this bipartisan increase and expansion of the renewable fuel standard was a great way to look at homegrown fuels for the future and making up a larger source of that supply.
It was the correct result in this case. We're very happy for this result, and we are very anxious for Jussie to get on with his career and
from renewable clean energy. So all of these show that we have made progress working together over the last decade.
And to move this not
in a bipartisan way to demonstrate that this transition is necessary, that this transition can be made.
Prosecution. Motion was to molly pros, which is a legal technical term for dismissed charges.
Make it successfully without hurting our economy, and that we can drive down costs for businesses and consumers.
Jussie voluntarily agreed to the forfeiture of the bond money.
So is this
we believe to the city of Chicago, but we don't know.
Is it a deal or not a deal? He's giving up his bond.
There is no deal. The state dismissed the
and better protect our environment. That is so, so critical. I'm so concerned about the cost of
charges. There's nothing. We have nothing to say to the police department except to investigate
the impacts of climate change that I asked my colleague, Senator Collins, to request with me from the Government Accounting Agency.
Gate charges and not try their cases in the press, but to allow matters to be investigated.
Of these impacts were. Why did I want that information? Because in the Northwest, we're already seeing more damage from fires that are
investigated, allow the state to investigate and to bring charges, and not to jump ahead and utilize the to convict people before they are tried in a court of law. Next question. I have no idea what occurred in this case and why it occurred. I can just say that things seem to spiral somewhat out of control. We've gotten to a result that is the right result in this case, and we're happy for that. I have no idea what. Plenty of people forfeit their bond in situations like this. Jussie is, and as if you were in the courtroom, heard the prosecutors say, and we made sure that the prosecution knew. He is someone who has dedicated his life to public service since he was 15 years old. He has taken the city of Chicago as his home. He has volunteered in a variety of ways. He is a good, solid citizen of the city of Chicago. That was the comment made by the prosecutor today. And the Ondero brothers said more than once that the $3,500 check they received was for exactly what Jussie said. It was for nutrition and training. They were his trainers. That statement was not true. I don't know where the superintendent got that information. I was not privy to it, and quite frankly have not seen that footage. So I have no idea where that came from, which is why you should allow investigation and allow the state to investigate a charge before you go to the press. I have no idea. I don't have information that the state would have as to why they brought these charges. I don't know. You'd have to ask the state. The two men who attacked him have indicated that they attacked him, so we already know who attacked him. Those brothers have, well, that's up to the state.
To be clear, there are
No. No. Well, the two brothers have said that they attacked him, so, we don't want to try them in the press any more than he wanted to be tried in the press. That decision was made so that he could go on with his life and get this over with and not have to fight and not have to continue with all of the disruption to his career. He is a very sweet individual who has for a lifetime dedicated himself to his career, to the public, to children, to the movement in the LGBTQIA community. And this was a disruption to that. He wants to get back to it. I'll allow you to hear from him briefly, and then we're gone.
Hey, everybody. I just made a couple notes. First of all, I want to thank my family, my friends, the incredible people of Chicago and all over the country and the world who have prayed for me, who have supported me, who have shown me so much love. No one will ever know how much that has meant to me, and I will forever be grateful. I want you to know that not for a moment was it in vain. I've been truthful and consistent on every single level since day one. I would not be my mother's son if I was capable of one drop of what I have been accused of. This has been an incredibly difficult time, honestly one of the worst of my entire life. But I am a man of faith, and I'm a man that has knowledge of my history, and I would not bring my family, our lives, or the movement through a fire like this. I just wouldn't. So I want to thank my legal counsel from the bottom of my heart, and I would also like to thank the state of Illinois for attempting to do what's right. Now I'd like nothing more than to just get back to work and move on with my life. But make no mistakes, I will always continue to fight for the justice, equality, and betterment of marginalized people everywhere. So again, thank you for all the support, thank you for faith, and thank you to God. Bless y'all. Thank you very much.